none of the faithful of Sigmar like to discuss what happens when a Stormcast is reforged too many times. My name is Goliath, this is the Goliath by Beastiarum Miniatures, and this is my print of the week. Welcome to Print of the Week. This is the first of what should be a long-running series taking a look at some of the awesome and cool stuff that you can print at home, and this time around we're focusing on the Goliath by Beastiarum Miniatures. Now this was printed on the Saturn by Elgu, which Elgu very kindly provided for the purpose of making these videos, so thank you very much to them. And the settings and resin which we use to produce this should be on the screen right about now. This particular model and design is one of those rare instances where someone has made something that I absolutely love from top to bottom with no exceptions. And it's actually forming the core of what will be an entirely 3D printed Stormcast Eternals army, although admittedly it's not going to look all that much like Stormcast Eternals because I really like the idea of the fact that reforging can have issues for the Stormcast Eternals. It can cause a degradation of mental stability and of memory. And I love the idea that that could also result in physical corruption as well. This is going to be acting as Indrasta for my army. Happily, the Goliath stands at about the same height as Indrasta. Being a much larger model but not being on a raised bit of scenery means that they are at about the same height. And the rest of the force is going to be similarly deformed and evil looking. There is of course quite a heavy Dark Souls / Bloodborne aesthetic to this model, which is one of the reasons I like it so much. Those games and the style of FromSoft as a whole has really kind of informed the way that I've taken a lot of my kit bashing, converting and modelling in general, and frankly Beastiarum Miniatures produce a lot of extremely grim-dark but very detailed and very gnarly looking models. Now with this particular model I was trying to paint it relatively quickly but not skimp on the grimdark, so I've gone for a pretty simple armour recipe. I dry brushed metallic black from Vallejo, then Leadbelcher from Citadel, and then Stormhost Silver from Citadel. I wanted the armour to be metallic but still be quite dark in the recesses, and personally I find that dry brushing can give you that result nice and quickly. This is all effectively preparation for the later stage of using streak and grime to properly dirty up the model. With that done, it was time to do the cloth on this model, and I have to admit I fall into a bit of a rut when it comes to painting cloth, because when it's something like an armoured figure, some sort of knight particularly, I really like the idea of them having red cloth or red cloaks. There's something about a fairly regal colour that looks tattered and battered and old that just seems to suit this kind of model really well. Because I'm nothing if not consistent, this was also dry brushed. This time using Bloodfest Crimson from Scale 75, Blood Red from Scale 75, and Pure Red from Army Painter. Admittedly, it would have paid to do this a lot more delicately and probably not with dry brushing at all, as it meant I had to go back and repair some of the armour panels that I caught with the red, but I'm happy with the end effect and it wasn't too much trouble to sort out the bits that I caught. Once I had the red cloth done, I also painted the bandages around the back of the legs. I just did a single coat of white for this, as these need to look mucky and grimy at the end of the day. With that done, it was onto the stonework. The grave on the base of this model is actually available as a separate print, which I have a good number of as they make excellent gravestone markers for D&D. One of the things I love about this model though is that it looks like the axe head is made of stone as well, as though it was part of some sort of monument or church, or maybe a mausoleum that's been smashed down. My go-to for any stonework now is simply to base coat black, then dry brush grey, then dry brush white. I rarely do anything more than that. It is definitely lazy, but it is also quite fun and gives a pretty decent result for very little time spent. Now at this point I started doing the details on the base, which it turns out was kind of superfluous because I want this model to fit in with the rest of my Age of Sigmar stuff, which all has a very specific basing scheme, and I didn't think about the fact that whilst it would be cool to have all the skulls, the rib cages and the swords painted, it's not actually going to show up all that much because once it's covered in woodland scatter, it's going to kind of disappear. With all that being done, it's time to start considering the unthinkable, slathering this thing in streaking grime, absolutely covering it in something that is a different shade to pretty much anything else you've put on here aside from the red. Honestly, it's still a bit of a scary step and I still don't like it when it first goes on, but the end result is so much fun that it kind of evens out in the end. If you're not familiar with streaking grime, it is effectively an enamel paint. You put it all over the model, or the parts that you want to look particularly grim and dirty, and then you use white spirit to wipe it away, leaving it only in the recesses of the model. It's very effective at creating a dirty, grimy feel. Once you're happy with the amount put on the model, you just use a cotton bud soaked in white spirit to move it around and take it off those raised areas, leaving it sunk into those recessed spaces. When it comes to painting grim, dark feeling models, this is kind of a vital step for me. I feel like it adds an extra layer of grime and dirt that is otherwise kind of tricky to achieve. It definitely feels as though it's become its own specific style at this stage. And for a model like this, something that I wanted to feel forgotten and ancient and almost at the end of its life, it felt like something I really had to do to really make it feel the part. One of the key parts of this particular sculpt is the chains that have been locked around the armour itself. You can see padlocks are connecting these chains together so that whatever is in this suit of armour cannot possibly leave even if it wanted to. Now, even though that might not be particularly congruent with the lore for Stormcast Eternals, I really like the idea of this, the fact that the creature within this suit is incapable of escaping, that it's having to sustain itself through the consumption of other living creatures, as we can see through the faces pushing out through the midriff. I wanted an easy way to indicate that those locks are never opened. It is not an option to open them. They have been sealed shut and they will never be released. To give that some sort of visual cue, I used Dirty Down Rust, which is a borderline miracle bottle of magic that provides really good, realistic looking rust with just one application via a normal brush. It's only a small detail, but I think it adds quite a lot to the model because it really hammers home that these have not been touched or tampered with for a long time. Now, with the streaking grime mostly removed, just settling into those recesses with those faces slightly highlighted, the padlocks and some parts of the chain nicely rusted up, and the head of that axe looking like a piece of salvaged stone, this is almost complete. At this stage I've spent around 2.5 hours painting this, and I'm pretty happy with the result given the time spent. As it stands, the aesthetic for this thing is pretty much exactly what I'm looking for. Something old, something dirty, grimy, something that is almost forgotten and is definitely not as glorious and shining as it once was. It looks worn, it looks dark, but it still looks incredibly dangerous, and that's one of the nicest things about this sculpt to begin with. The final step for this is to finish the base. Because basing is not really my thing, and I've got an established style for all of my Age of Sigmar armies that I'd like this to follow, this is achieved simply by spreading PVA glue all over the base and dipping it in woodland scatter. That's it. It's simple, but it works. A quick spray of varnish, and we are finished. I've yet to come up with a name for this character. I should come up with one. It is the centrepiece, after all, of a Stormcast Eternals force that is significantly different to most others. A force that has been reforged so often and so badly that they have started to degrade, that they have become nightmares as opposed to shining paragons, where the armour is dark and twisted and they are locked within it, or even their very forms themselves have become bestial in nature. And you can bet that at some point this is showing up in D&D as something that the party will have to be absolutely terrified of as well. This was the first episode of Print of the Week. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's going to improve over time. I'm looking to invest in a better camera. I'm also looking to spend more time on different models, to perhaps include things like painting a full force within the week, to explore different creators, different universes, and different model styles as we go. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.